So to be honest, I didn't really feel like making a video like this for a number of reasons, because I think over the last 10 years, there's been so much confusion and so much vitriol, so much anger from all sides of the argument. But I'll use the political tropes that we use in our society, left and the right. There's been so much anger and so much vitriol, so much hatred, so much vengeance, so much mockery, so much of the ideas surrounding race and stuff like that, that I didn't really feel like making this video. I had something else I was going to make, but I felt like if I didn't make this video and I just did what I was going to do, I would just miss a moment. You know, I tend to think I've talked about these things a lot, and so I don't want to keep beating that dead horse, but the horse is not dead, and these situations keep happening. So I want to talk about it a little bit differently. If I named this particular episode Tyre Nichols and the Fallacy of Fatherlessness and White Supremacy. And so many of you who watch me and who watch Cross Examine, you know that I am an equal opportunity offender. I call out the deeds of darkness on all sides. And I think over the last 10 years in our country and in the church, in the American Evangelical Church, the idea of race has had sort of two polarizing ideas. One side would be the people calling out white supremacy, right? Or white privilege. And then the other side would be those people saying the real issue is the lack of fathers in the home, fatherlessness in the home. And then from that emerges Black Lives Matter and all that stuff. I want to talk about that today in light of the video that was released a couple days ago of Tyre Nichols. Many of you probably know this. If you just go on YouTube, you've probably seen a ton of videos. Even Fox News, surprisingly, is talking about this in the way they are. And the other news outlets that would represent the left are not surprisingly talking about this, but they have more voices on that side with sort of media outlets, so you hear different perspectives. But I want to talk about this. So real quick, Tyre Nichols is a 29-year-old black man from Memphis. As far as we know, not a criminal, working for FedEx, coming home, fellow photographer. So I am a photographer. I'm a pastor, but I'm a photographer. He was essentially brutally beaten. If you're old enough to remember Rodney King or have seen footage of Rodney King being brutally beaten by 4 police officers in LA in 1991, this was worse than that, because these 5 black police officers, mind you, they brutalized this man. And this guy apparently he was just taking pictures of the sunset, stuff I like to do. And he was murdered. I'm not going to go into many more details because many of you have heard this already and can easily access that. I want to use my time in this video to talk about some other things that I think we need to think about as we process this particular killing, murder, and other ones that are to come. And I want to start by first asking a question. Are our expectations too high? Now, I'm not talking about if you're of the Christian tradition like me, love believes all things, bears all things, hopes all things. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the idea of what we think America is, or what America is aspiring to be. Like, if we're honest, like this right now, this day and age, January 30th, 2023 is essentially, in America's history, the freest that America has been as a country. No more slavery, no more outward laws of discrimination. Women are allowed to even attain the highest office of the land. I mean, there was a time when women couldn't even have a checking account, a bank account, right? Women's suffrage in the 20th century. This is the freest we've been. Immigrants can come to this country and not get held up and mistreated because they have this is what we're supposed to be. But then when you look at, okay, if this is the freest, the sort of utopia that what America is about, then you have to look and say, well, what is it? What are we seeing here? And again, I'm not trying to say negative things like, oh, I hate America, go somewhere else. First of all, I'll never go back to another country because black Africans built it. My ancestors built it. So I'm not going nowhere. But my point is that we're allowed to critique. I mean, I critique my wife, and I love her more than I love America. And if I disagree with her at times, I can disagree with certain things that we see in our country, and that's without being said. But I wonder if are our expectations too high, and we just expect this sort of treatment of people, and the expectation that people will be treated a certain way, are they too high? And I'm not talking about should we not desire these things. I'm talking about look at the historical evidence. Does the historical evidence of our nation, the greatest nation in the history of the world, does the historic evidence of our nation, should that have these expectations that these things shouldn't happen? I mean, I'm not going to, let's just skip over slavery, racism, and all of that. And let's just move to, I mean, you hit all of that stuff. You hit the celebration of violence through slavery, racism, through the Wild West, through the mafia. Then you get the celebration of evil and greed through aspects of capitalism, and one of the most darkest times in our country, which I've talked about in a previous video, through the stock market crash, the Great Depression, and then you get abortion and mistreatment of people and all these things. And like, we have the highest violent crime rate in the country, the highest prison population in the country. This is all what we have in the greatest country in the world. We celebrate, we idolize violence and death. We do it. We do it in our video games. We do it in our movies. We do it in our music. We create this. We make women look like you have to be this particular size and look this particular way. We have this view of what our country should be. And when you look at the historical sort of trajectory from 1492, from 1607, Jamestown, West Virginia, to today, does the history lead to us having the expectation that we should be a certain way? I don't think so. I don't think so. And I'm not saying we shouldn't desire good things. If you're of the Christian tradition, we should hope to see things happen. But historically, I'm just not getting this reality. And this brings us to Tyre Nichols and sort of what happened. It's these two polarizing realities of one side is saying, oh, it's the fatherlessness in these communities, that's the main problem. And the other side, it's white supremacy. And I think they're both to some degree fallacies. Now, I'm not saying there's not truth in those things, but to denigrate all of these situations to simply white supremacy or fatherlessness, I think is foolish. But let me first prove to you that this is what's happening. So as this story broke, Jason Whitlock, surprise, was on Tucker Carlson, and here's what he said about the Tyre Nichols situation and the police. Here's what he said. It's acting up because I'm live. This is funny.
On the street level was either 24 to 32 years old. Everybody. It was a group of young black men, 5-on-1. Looked like gang violence to me. It looked like what young black men do when they're supervised by a single black woman. And that's what they got going on in the Memphis Police Department. They've elected or put some black woman in charge of the police force. And we're getting the same kind of chaos and disunity and violence that we see in a lot of these cities that are run by single mothers. If we want to discuss the breakdown of family that leads to disrespect for authority that causes you to resist the police and run from the police and not comply with the police because you resist authority at all times because there was no male authority in your home. Let's have that discussion. But that's not where they want to take us. They want to take us down the path of saying, you know what? This is Tucker Carlson's fault. This is some random white, this is Donald Trump's fault. It's not. It's the breakdown of family and the buying in to all these left-wing.
Okay. So essentially, Jason Whitlock is saying that this happened because of fatherlessness in the black community and the lack of submitting to a male figure. He said that you're resisting arrest and all of this stuff, weren't complying. That's not true of Tyre Nichols, obviously. If you saw the video, that's not the case at all. But this is where Jason Whitlock goes, and he's a conservative black guy. I just think that they love to have the black people on there that say some of the things that white people really think, but can't say them because they're scared they'll get punched in the mouth if they run into somebody black in real life. Let's just keep it 100. And then he says, yeah, but they want to say this is Tucker Carlson's fault. Now, he makes some good points. There is a large degree of fatherlessness in particular communities, black communities, but even just poor communities. You see that. That's a trope. But that's a trope. Is that really the problem? So the problem is that because the first of all, you don't even know if these men had black fathers. Tyre Nichols had a stepdad. His mom and stepdad are doing interviews together. She didn't marry that dude on Saturday. He's watched that boy grow up to some degree, so he had a father figure in the home. We don't know if the 5 police officers had dads or not. There's been no communication in the media as to their parental guidance or not. These are just 5 black men. But he immediately goes to this particular talking trope of fatherlessness. And then he's saying that led by a single mother, black woman in the police department, the police chief. Here's the problem with that. Here's the problem with that conversation. While I do think fathers do play a critical role in society, obviously I'm a dad and I'm glad for it. While I do think that happens, to say that that's the reason, particularly in the black community, why these situations happen with police, and I think Jason Whitlock, if I'm not mistaken, professes to be a Christian, but I could be wrong. But I've heard others say that he said that. The challenge with his perspective is it lacks biblical, if he's a Christian, it lacks a biblical analysis. Things happen because of sin. It doesn't matter what gender or what ethnicity you are. Sin is sin is sin. Fam, there are poor white people. If I felt like it, I could have easily pulled up the stats in the Appalachian community where poor white people live, or pulled up stats in the Latino community where poor Latinos live, and they all have the same stats, right? Dropout rates, violence rates, drug, all this stuff, right? These are just wherever people are, sin is. But once you start isolating it to this demographic, you have a problem. And here's one of the reasons why this is a problem. If you're going to blame fatherlessness in the black community as the reason why it is where it is, then what do you say to all of the fathers who have been in the homes for their sons and daughters since the beginning of since the colonies to America's founding? What about all those dads who taught their sons how to be racist and passed it all down? Who taught their sons how to mistreat women and passed that on down? Fatherlessness in the black community, both Thomas Sowell and other conservatives will recognize as a new phenomenon which they connect to democratic policies. All right. So if Thomas Sowell, which they say is right, is that this is a new phenomenon that really took shape after the second migration from the South to the North, black people, and then in these communities, then it starts happening around the Lyndon Johnson Great Society welfare policies. All right. So if that was the case, of fatherlessness was the problem, then what about all of those white fathers who taught their kids to be racist for generations, right? There were fathers in those homes that taught their kids to be wicked, that set in motion where our country is today. Remember, the people that have ruled our country, humanly speaking, have been largely white men. The corruption has largely, that comes from the top, is about when the Great Depression happened, those Wall Street bankers were all white men, right? So if we're going to blame fatherlessness, then why don't we blame it for where we are as a nation and not try to reduce it to the black community when something like this happens? If there's a fatherlessness problem, it is not in the black community that started when the democratic policies. It started when the colonists landed and those fathers taught their children how to continue with all of that stuff. That's the problem with it, right? You can't just say it's fatherlessness in the black community when we have a history of serious sinful activity that included fathers in the home, for the most part. Then you have the other side of it that will say it's white supremacy. So I found out about this story because I just happened to randomly just check Twitter and I saw a buddy, well, not a buddy of mine, but a guy that I know, he posts, I pretty much respect him, but he tweet quoted someone saying this: for people saying, but the police who killed Tyre Nichols are black, how is that racist? How is that racist because they were all black? And he said, anti-blackness is a cultural phenomenon shared across racial and ethnic backgrounds. John Singleton told y'all 32 years ago. And then the guy I know who quoted it was like, facts, these people can't see the racial component. So immediately it becomes a white supremacy thing. And if you're black, then you've just sort of submitted to the white supremacy reality. That's not really true, though. That's not really the case. It's deeper than that. It's a deeper reality than that. And I don't think it's just white supremacy. Again, I did a couple videos called The Color of Satan where I talked about the class issue, right? I said it's really about class. Race is a part of it, but it's largely about class. And I don't have this document in front of me, but when you get time, go Google. You can find this online. What's the percentage of people who make a certain income that have violent interactions with police versus the people below a certain median income? The people that make over $200,000 a year or a certain income, they hardly have any interactions with police. Even black people. You do not see police going up into affluent black communities doing this in the same way. Now, I'm not saying that ethnicity doesn't play a role. There's a deeper issue I want to point out in a second, but it's largely police are able to do this to people in poorer communities, regardless of their ethnicity. Now, the reason why in America, when it's black people, it gets highlighted more than white people, like say a Tony Timpa, who essentially had the same thing happen to him that happened to George Floyd, is because there's no historical precedent of white men killing white men. No one cares about that. In America, we're drawn to the narratives, right? So white versus black, and the racism there is a legacy of our nation. It is a foundational ideology in America. So when we hear white and black, we immediately have context that interests us because there's a long history. I've said this before, but just like if I saw a Jew and a German heavyweight boxing match, I'm going to watch it. Why? Because there's such a history between them. And I bet you both ethnicities, Jews and Germans, would get behind their boxer because it would mean more than just a fight. This is why when it's black versus white, it's not just media and dollars. It's the narrative of our history. That's the reason why we're drawn to stories of white versus black. But our expectations are too high. To call it white supremacy simply is not, it minimizes the deeper reality. Because you have a lot of white poor people who would say, man, we get the same treatment from police. It's not just a white supremacy issue. These are human rights violations, or to be biblical, these are Imago Dei violations. These are people made in the image of God that we're allowing law enforcement to violate. So if black police officers can kill black people like the way what's the real issue? What's the real issue? And there is a persistent pathology that exists. It's a pathology I've been saying for years, and the pathology is essentially this. Black people are prone to violence and criminality. That's one part of it, right? That's one part of it. But we associate crime and criminality with finances, with being poor. This is why when someone rich, like these Bernie Madoff and Enron and these who make millions of dollars, this is why these corporate CEOs, even in a recession, can give themselves millions of dollars in bonuses. No one says anything. This is why we call it white collar crimes. Why we put people who are millionaires in the Club Med, like you go to prison and you're like playing tennis and you're basically locked up, but you're not in the typical general population as those who make a lesser income than you. Even our criminal system and the way we view things, even if we add ethnicity, there's a level to which class plays a role. We will treat people who make a certain economic status as, for the most part, there are obviously exceptions, but for the most part, if you make a certain, and it's known, you don't get bothered in the same way. If you minimize it just to ethnicity, then you get people pushing back against you. There's a persistent pathology that black people are prone to violence and criminality, but underneath that, the pathology is the criminality comes from the poor. And in America, in a society where we care about merit and money, we're a capitalistic nation. We have to be honest. We care about money and people who make money. They're important to us. We don't care about people unless they have the perception of money or power, which makes you think they're going to earn money. That's who we care about. That's why we're fascinated with celebrities, because they're rich and they're powerful. This is who we care about. So there is a pathology that black people are prone to violence and criminality. And to be honest, there are communities that are black people where we own that. At some point, black people went from fighting against the narratives of white supremacists to owning them. And you see it happen. I mean, if you're not old enough to probably remember this, but you saw it from the civil rights era to black exploitation films with these movies that were all black and sort of in the inner city, you know, movies like Coffee Brown and Black and Uptown Saturday Night and Black Caesar and Goldie and the Mac and all these movies. They become these elements in these movies. They become heroes to black people because now we're telling the movie from our vantage point. But those heroes were often gangsters, pimps, hustlers, and that's who you cheer for. And so you develop this because you already have a historical hatred for the government. Now you create communities in which the government doesn't matter. So you create rules like we don't snitch. We're not telling. We don't care what we do to each other. We're not telling on nobody because we don't trust this government. And that that idea still persists today. Rap music is the antithesis of this idea. You can go back to The Message, 1979, where they talk about broken glass everywhere. People pissing on the corner. No, they just don't care. My son said, Daddy, I don't want to go to school because the teacher's a jerk. She must think I'm a fool. And all the kids smoke reefer. I mean, he's just breaking down what's happening in the black community. At the end of that song, they get arrested by the police, right? So again, this historical narrative of not trusting the government, not trusting the authority because of their mistreatment, because of these imago Dei, these image of God, image bearer violations, you create, in a sense, an identity for yourself, for the black community that says we don't care about none of these things. But you have a history, if you're black, of watching white people be violent towards you when you were nonviolent. The civil rights movement was nonviolent. So this idea that black people are prone to violence and criminality only makes sense in modern day language in certain communities. It does not make sense throughout American history because black people, despite being attacked, slaved, brutalized, beaten, never retaliated in the ways that we see happening today. So this idea of it being about white supremacy, it's just not altogether true. That's part of it, but it's deeper. There's a persistent pathology that black people are prone to violence and criminality, but that's not true if you look at American history. It's true if you look at the country in the last couple decades. But it's deeper. It's people who I remember hearing this story about Freddie Gray. There was a documentary. I wish I could find it. And these police officers were saying basically, we can't, I think he was like one of them things where they couldn't show his face because he was being honest. And he basically said, look, officers know that we have to be careful who we beat up on, because if we could end up beating up on some judge's son or something like that. He said, we can't take that chance when they're white. We don't know who they are. But when they're black, we pretty much know who they are and what they don't have. And so we take advantage of that. And I've heard plenty of other people say this, right? So there's a lot more going on. It's not just black people are prone to violence and criminality. It's that because people think that way, we can get away with treating people a certain way. But it's not just black. If people think that you're poor, then in America, we will excuse whatever happens to you if we think you're poor, because no matter what, the greatest sin in America is to not have money, to not be rich. And if you're not rich, then anything can happen to you. That's the real pathology. And so when you see these situations happen, we're like, oh my gosh, no, it's the real pathology. It's about how much money do you make? And if you make a lot of money, then you can hire lawyers to get you out of this. And if you don't, you can't do nothing about it. You're getting a public defender. And they work for the state, right? So these tropes are not true. And then and here's why I hated Black Lives Matter. Here's why I hated them. Before I even knew that they were Marxist and saying all this stuff, here's why I hated them. Because I knew that they were a cursed gift. They were a gift in that they brought attention to things that black people have been saying for a while, and conversations were happening. But I knew they were cursed because they didn't have the wisdom, and they have an agenda that later was revealed. They have an agenda that wasn't really it was too ethnically driven. It wasn't about the broader context of how we treat people. So you have this big movement, Black Lives Matter, then you try to incorporate all these different people and all these different groups, sexuality groups and different people, but you stayed in a narrative and then it didn't work. And then here's the real curse of Black Lives Matter. When they get exposed as having stolen millions of dollars and really financed all these homes, this lady who says she can't trust white people has a white lesbian as her lover and living in a white community in the $6 million home, all this stuff. What that did when that exposure came out, when people saw Black Lives Matter as a fraud, you know what they thought? They didn't think it was the organization. They thought the whole idea of the cause is fraudulent. You see, Black Lives Matter took on a cause that they shouldn't have and made it about themselves. They were the face of the black thought in America, and they were not. They had the best slogan. That's what they had. Black Lives Matter had the better slogan, but they didn't have the better ideology. And so they became the face of the struggles that black people have, and when they proved to be fraudulent, everything was like, yep, we told you it was all a fraud. And so now when you bring something up, you're just woke. Well, is Tyre Nichols woke? Is his mom woke? Is the Memphis police and all these people watching this video, are they woke? Because this is the stuff that black people have been talking about. Are they woke? No, they're not woke. This is the problem. But see, Black Lives Matter, because they went down, these police officers probably we don't care. Because that stuff was a fraudulent. We'll get away with it. So these guys, these officers, knowing that they're on body cam. Now, mind you, body cams, new laws, procedures came in as a result of the influence of Black Lives Matter. I'll give them that. But these police officers didn't care. They were saying stuff like, he's going for my gun, lying on the video so they could set up their lie. In their minds, they were beating this man 5 against 1, thinking they can get away with it. Because in reality, one, when you don't have money, no one cares what happens to you. That's why many of you haven't heard of Tony Tempa. And if you did, you probably heard about it when Vody Bakum brought it up to make a case that George Floyd, the same thing happened to a white dude. But no one cared about Tony Timpa because he's not Tony Starks. He's not important. He doesn't have money. So Black Lives Matter ruined essentially all of the situations and have given justification for people because they think this stuff doesn't matter. Here's the other problem that happened. All this language started to come up about systemic racism. Systemic racism. Systemic racism. Systemic racism. This is systemic. It's systemic racism. And the problem was they were trying to make a point. That language came from Stokely Carmichael in a speech that he gave with another prominent Black Power leader. My camera is demonic. There's a devil in the video. But he gave a speech and he used systemic racism as an issue. And that became a talking point before Black Lives Matter and then throughout Black Lives Matter. And here's the problem with systemic racism. It's the wrong word. It was the wrong word. It wasn't systemic. Let me explain the difference between systemic. The right word is systematic. Systemic. They kept saying systemic racism. And people would be like, show me, where is systemic racism? Where is it? And but you can't point to it. It's not like a tree, like, oh, there it is right there. How do you know people are more loving? Well, where can you see it? What stats do you have? Like, you just can't point this stuff out, but you kept using the word systemic. Here's what systemic means. And here's why it failed. This is why it didn't. Here's what systemic means. It means relating to a system, especially as opposed to a particular part. So it meant, systemic means the whole system. The whole system. And let's be clear. That's not true. That's not the case. That's not the case, especially not today. America is not systemic racism where it's in every system. Okay? That's not true. Racism, if we're going to call it racism, is about people's hearts, right? And wherever people are, it's possible to be racist in every system. But to say it's in every system was like, it was the wrong word. It was the wrong word because it made it seem like embedded in every institution of America is a racist bent towards Black people. Now, some people may think that, but it's like, okay, if we have, then we've made a lot of progress then, fam. There's some organizations that are like, nah, that's not true at all for them, right? But then there's some that are. So how do you process it then? You kept saying systemic racism, making it seem like it's embedded everywhere and in every culture. And let's just be clear. Black people in many ways are some of the most celebrated people in our day. In the last 40 years, black music has always been the trendsetter. Elvis stole his groove from Black folks down in Memphis and then became the king of rock, but he got it from other people, Black people. Rap music has been the defining cultural soundtrack of America. It's cool to be Black. We got the slang, the languages, the hairstyles. No one wants to be Scandinavian. No one wants to be, they want to be Black. You cannot say that America is systemically racist when you got nothing but praise for Black people. In certain sports, we dominate the sport. We are millionaires because of that. You can't say America is systemically racist, but you can say that racism is systematic. That's a different word. Systemic, it's in the whole system as opposed to part of it. Here's what systematic means. Done or acting according to a fixed plan or system. It means methodical. You see, I think racism is systematic. It's done in accordance to a plan or system, so you can be in the criminal justice system and act racist and that would be systematic racism. Now you could make a case that the whole criminal justice system, but you look at the banking system, racism is in every bank, the whole financial institution. Now that thing is against people who have money, don't have money. Now, I'm not saying that racism doesn't happen, but it's not the whole system. That would be systemic. But systematic means it happens methodically as part of a system. See, racism in America is very systematic. So you could be, the owner of the Clippers. I forgot that dude's name right now. Who's having an affair and committing adultery, and his girlfriend taped him saying, "I don't want you having these black athletes, Magic Johnson and them, coming to the games." And so he had to sell the team. They were like, "We don't want to play for this dude." None of the players boycotted. They were millionaires. Millionaires. The dude was a billionaire. He's a billionaire. Is racist? The NBA? Is the NBA? And this is what people say. So is NBA is racist? Yeah, maybe when Magic Johnson came into the league, they were white players. The ABA, when the ABA and the NBA combined, white NBA fans hated it. And then Magic and Bird came in, and it was like showtime. And then Jordan comes in, and this is it. Ain't nobody white jumping over that dude. Ain't nobody doing it, right? You can't. These things aren't. But are there racist owners in the NBA? Sure. In the NFL, 80% black people. Is that systemic? No. And this is what the people who push back say. How is that systemic? Because you're using the wrong word. It's systematic. It's done according to a system. So the system is in place. Banking. Now I can be racist towards you within this system, and that's systematic. But to say the banking system that's just wrong. And so what happened was, because we were so race conscious and so offended and so angry, we were using words to sum up our experience, and it wasn't the right word. And then you have dorks like BLM come in, and then they're making themselves the face of something when they were the fake of all of it, right? So what's the real problem? How do we think of this biblically? Biblically, how should we look at where we're at? And how should we look at the outrage? You got people marching in different parts of the country in outrage. How should we see this as, if you're a believer? I'm assuming you're a Christian. If you're not, that's fine. Thanks for watching. And if you hit the like and subscribe button, the Lord will bless you at some point. How should we see it? It's 3 words. 3 words from a proverb. If you're a genuine Christian, here's how we just need to process what's happening in America. It's not fatherlessness. It's not white supremacy. In many ways, all this anger, all this aggression. I'm not saying it's never those things. Don't get me wrong. I'm saying it's more complicated than white supremacy or fatherlessness in the home. It's more complicated than anti-blackness. It's more complicated. 3 words that I think every believer should say, okay, this is how is this. A hope deferred. A hope deferred. Jason Whitlock said this. The guy who said the video I showed you at the beginning of the episode. He said this in a tweet after this came out. 5 police officers in Memphis appear to have committed a violent homicide. It's like these guys can't just acknowledge, like, hey, this was evil. You just can't, because it's all racial. It's like, oh, I don't want to give in to the leftist narrative. Stupid, man. They've been fired and charged with 2nd-degree murder. What is the protest about? What hasn't happened? And he makes a good point. Hey, these people have been, but here's the problem. There's a hope deferred. Because you see, for many people, particularly people of color, but just people of a particular economic sort of perspective, being charged is not the same thing as being convicted. We've seen a lot of police officers charged for misconduct, and they've been acquitted by a jury of their peers. And so for many people, it's not about being charged. It's about being convicted, which doesn't always happen. So there's a hope deferred. There's a lot of people in our country that had their economic hopes deferred. They're really struggling. They're really like, man, I can't make ends meet. And because in America, so much of our value is connected to how much money we make, then when you're not making money, you're frustrated. And when you want something and you can't afford it, and you see other people gloating that they have it, you're angry. In the black community, this is why a lot of these rappers and stuff are getting killed. because you're flossing, you got all this money, and you got dudes in the street who are real goons. They don't got the money you have, and they find out that you're in a location that's near them. They pulling up. They're gonna pull up and take whatever you have. Now we can call that sinful, angry, but underneath all of that is a hope deferred. I'm a counselor. I do a lot of marriage counseling, and you know what? Most of the conflicts that I walk people through in marriage, they're just hurt. They're really hurt. The wife who doesn't want to have sex with her husband, and he thinks she's being selfish and all of this. She's just hurt. She's been hurt by this dude. The husband who's harsh with his wife and is not gentle, doesn't help her around the house. She thinks he's lazy and selfish. And that could be true, but he's also just hurt. The Bible says a hope deferred makes the heart sick. So how do people act with a sick heart? This is what we see happening. There's a hope deferred. Because in this country, our primary identity, not from the scriptures, but from the society, from the Constitution, is economic. You're valued by how much money you make. You're valued by how much money you make. You will never in this country see someone who doesn't make a certain income be the leader of the nation. Because we equate economic success with favor. The real favoritism. This is why it's a good time to be a believer, but it's also a challenging time. Because we have a hope that's not deferred. Because our hope is not found in our economic, ethnic, or political value. It's just not. Now, in a different video than this, I want to share why we haven't been able to seize that and why America has lost its prophetic voice. But to close this video, it's that our hope is not even in this country or the earth as it is. You know, Revelation 21, beginning, verse 1, it talks about that there's going to be the God's going to burn this earth and heaven and create a new heaven and a new earth. Like, this isn't even ultimately our home and what it's going to look like. My identity is not rooted in who I vote for, what neighborhood I come from, or if I make six figures or not, biblically speaking. But we've lost that because we've become so much. We've made the American culture and the ideologies of it so much a part of our theology that we've missed being able to tell people, hey, I'm secure and my hope is not in if the market crashes. Will that affect us? Sure. But if there's another great recession, I'm going to be in heaven one day with the King of Kings, right? With the great rewarder. Keep your great recession. I'm going to be with the great rewarder. And the new song I'm going to be dropping soon, I say that I don't want flowers. I don't need flowers. I was saved by the florist. We've lost this. And so we're left to trust political pundits who tell us it's the left ideologies of white supremacy. And we're left to trust political pundits on the left to tell us it's the white ideologies of white supremacy. I say it's neither of them, or it's all of them. But it's really a hope deferred. That's why people are marching. That's why people are protesting. Because they're hurt. And Jason Whitlock, if you watch this isn't about arresting and charging. It's about convicting. Let's see these 5 officers go to prison for murder. What do I know? What do I know? Thanks for watching. See you next video.